So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Rush Holt, the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Publisher of the Science family of journals at AAAS.
Thank you, Vaughn. Oh, you look good here. What a good turnout, wonderful participation. I'm delighted to see so many people really from around the world, and I'm glad to recognize Sergio Pastrana, who is one of the participants, the head of the Cuban Academy of Sciences. Romain Morenzi is here. Romain Morenzi is the head of the World Academy of Sciences, TWAS, headquartered in Trieste. You will hear from Flavia Schlegel shortly. Those of you who go to one of the sessions will get a chance to hear Rita Caldwell, who is the former head of the director of the National Science Foundation here. Ambassador Caulfield, our former ambassador, head of the interest section in Cuba. Ambassador Macaya from Costa Rica is to be here. I haven't seen him yet this morning, but okay. I'm pleased to recognize that distinguished participation, but we have really such diverse participation here in this conference. It's great to see. When AAAS launched the science diplomacy efforts, the better part of a decade ago, there was some concern in the science community about whether this was appropriate, whether this was somehow diluted science or diverted science. But of course, we were part of an important American tradition. I'm referring to Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and the other science diplomats that we have had throughout our history. At the first international conference in 2009, which was held in London in conjunction with the Royal Society, the report of the conference, New Frontiers in Science Diplomacy, described some of the opportunities for science in international affairs and for scientists to interact and affect diplomacy, from the soft power of science to fostering science diplomats, but also the conference warned of the dangers of politicization. In the past 7 years, the term science diplomacy has become really widely used, and we at AAAS are proud of the role we've been playing in advancing the idea of science diplomacy, partly through the journal that Vaughn and Tom and some of you edit, and also advancing the practice of science diplomacy through our international exchanges and memoranda and so forth. The term science diplomacy is now used and accepted and recognized, and your presence here will help to strengthen this effort. Whether it's working on research cooperation among scientists in various nations, or applying science to international problems, or building the capacity in developing countries to do science, science diplomacy is not only critical in international relations, in some situations it is the most important part of diplomatic efforts. Cold War examples abound, reminding policymakers of the important contributions that scientists and scientific cooperation played in détente with the Soviet Union, The obvious space cooperation with Apollo-Soyuz, talks on nuclear disarmament involving scientists, but even a very real but indirect effect on bringing an end to the Cold War, that a role that was played by American and Soviet physicists. Evgeny Velikov, for example, and others. In the 1970s, renormalization of diplomatic ties with the PRC was incentivized by, among other things, scientific cooperation and bringing technologies for modernization. When President Obama, at the beginning of his first term, very early in his first term, wanted to demonstrate a new beginning with the Middle East, science and science partnerships made an important pillar in what resulted from that Cairo speech. And one of the programs was launched to send science envoys, prominent U.S. scientists around the world, to nations and to regions, actually most recently to all the oceans. That's Ambassador Lubchenco. And AAAS has been honored that 5 of our past and present board members, including the current president of the AAAS, Jerry Richmond, have been science envoys, and our former editor-in-chief of Science, Bruce Alberts. The nuclear deal recently with the P5+1 nations and Iran is another example of the scientific and technical role that is found in international diplomacy. And it wouldn't have happened without the technical negotiations between Secretary of Energy Moniz and Ali Akbar Salehi, the head of the atomic agency in Iran. These have been publicly described. The British newspaper, The Telegraph, described these Iranian talks as MIT, a whiteboard, and nuclear physics, how the Iran deal was struck. The benefits to international policymaking really should be clear to most of the people in this room, but not so clear to the public at large. And so there's a lot that we have to do, I think, in communicating to make, to show that the principles of science research, of transparency and open communication, of evidence-based thinking, go a long way toward diffusing difficult situations, breaking through barriers, and developing working relationships that can yield benefits beyond the specific research that might be discussed. To say that science is international is almost trite. Scientific resources, from personnel to research funding, have, of course, spread across the globe and crossing borders with data, with human collaborators, with equipment, and that's increasingly necessary to deal with the kinds of science that is done these days. It's interesting that our journal, our principal journal, Science, internationally co-authored papers are now the norm. About 60% of our papers have co-authors from outside the United States. In 1992, so a quarter of a century ago now almost, it was less than 20%. In my own field of physics, international collaboration is the norm. Whether it's using the Large Collider at CERN or understanding the origins of the universe with the Square kilometer array being constructed between Africa and Australia, or working on any number of other international projects. Physicists know that the best chance for success, it means bringing the people and the resources together. Some areas, of course, can only be done internationally, some areas of research. Global challenges in climate change and pandemic threats must be international. So some science is of a scale where international cooperation and cost sharing are advisable. In other areas, internationalization of the science is necessary. This is a critical year for the global agreement on climate change. The IPCC has been a model of global cooperation, reviewing science that's critical to the policy decisions and a new framework. Now, in truth, at times, the science has led to friction there rather than diplomatic agreement. But ultimately, I expect that this will result in international understanding and international agreement. In December, at the official conference of the parties, an international scientific conference will, I think, lead to this agreement. There's a lead-up conference in Paris this summer to look at what we know about the science of the causes and the impacts, and what science suggests about actions and remedies. The recent epidemic of Ebola in several West African countries, or dengue in the tropical and subtropical regions of the Caribbean, or MERS in the Arabian Peninsula, or pandemic influenza, or any number of other known or yet unknown diseases, underscores the need for international cooperation in public health and in understanding the diseases and how to fight them. It's not only in these areas that I've listed. President Obama announced last year a national strategy to combat antibiotic resistance, which threatens the health and economic recovery, the economic well-being of countries anywhere. And last month, the National Action Plan was released on antibiotic resistance, and international collaboration was, no surprise, one of the major pillars. During February's annual meeting of the AAAS in San Jose, Dame Sally Davies, the UK's chief medical officer, warned of the global threat posed by antimicrobial resistance, calling it second only to climate change in the need for a global response. Technology has made crossing borders easier, from revolutions in global communications and information sharing to cheaper modes of transportation for people and goods. It increases the opportunities for scientific cooperation and, at the same time, the need. The recent news of the plan to normalize ties between the United States and Cuba, including relaxation of some travel restrictions, demonstrates the importance of diplomacy to international interactions and advancement. Since the imposition of the embargo more than half a century ago, scientific cooperation between the two countries has been impeded. There has been some here and there, and the AAAS has led many now delegations, as have some of the people in this room over the past few decades to Cuba. But now I think as relations move toward normalization, scientific exchange, and the scientists who already have experience working with Cubans and Cuban scientists having experience working with Americans will be on the forefront of carrying this normalization forward. On biomedical research to control and cure communicable and non-communicable diseases, on marine research to protect biodiversity in the waters of the Caribbean, on atmospheric research to understand the hurricanes, so many of which pass through Cuba on their Cuban waters on their way here. There is good reason for the scientific exchanges, and I think it will be essential to the normalization of relations. I gave the example of the majority of science papers that are now internationally co-authored. Across all the citation index science journals, international co-authorships have risen by over 50%, from 16% in 1997 to 25% in 2012. And the trends are clearly growing. Scientific collaborations and partnerships develop for many reasons, whether it's access to expertise or facilities or local environment, or to deal with the shared interests or shared problems. It's as an increasing number of countries are investing in science, international scientific collaborations are now involving more and more partners, more and more essentially. To truly knit together a global scientific community that can cooperate to advance science and address global challenges, there needs to be organized support for emerging scientific communities and countries investing in science, and organized relationships between the more advanced scientific countries. In other words, we should declare a move for science diplomacy. AAAS has partnered with the World Academy of Sciences, which focuses on the developing world, to hold, for example, an annual short course for developing country scientists and administrators and policymakers to help them understand the role of science and scientists in international policies. I've argued for years that the best developmental aid that can be given to a country is building the capacity for doing science. This course, the second course, will be held this June, I think is an important step in reaching out to the developing countries, but we have to do much more. The ongoing globalization of science reinforces the need to bring more scientists into discussions of international policies, and the scientific community needs to ensure that those policies promote and don't interfere with collaboration around the world. That's what you're talking about today. That's what we are working on in our international office here. It's what many of your organizations are working on. I hope that an outcome of today's meeting will be greater recognition of and greater organization for science diplomacy. Thanks.